Didn't seem to have an impact there. At any rate, width is the one that you would you typically set for that, and it automatically adjusts that. Notice also in the case of Nav A, the navigation is oriented horizontally because I make the links display of inline in here, and I made links display of block in the main one, the main screen style sheet. That's what messed it up.
Is that when you switch to?
Yep.
So you need the visibility rather than display?
Well, let's see. Not if I override it. I could still say display none, but here I would have to say visibility visible, display block, let's say. There you go. I forgot I made that change. And again, that's further proof that in this particular case, both of those style sheets are applying. And remember, when you have more than one style sheet applying, it can work because the styles cascade. In other words, what you define in one, if you don't override it in the other, it applies. If you do override it in the second one, then the second one takes precedence. Let me give a for instance. I'm going to not put a background color. No, let's see, what will I do? I'm not going to put a color on the text here, the body text in the handheld. The text then becomes green. Where did it get that green? Well, because in the body of the screen CSS, I declared the color as green. I did not override that in the body of the handheld, therefore I got the color of the other style sheet. So,
Is that called a child?
is what called a child?
When you have more than one, the second one is called a child?
I don't think so,
Okay.
because it's not really a hierarchy.
Okay. I've heard the expression child style sheet, I don't know.
Let's Google.
Good old Google.
Is it a WordPress thing?
Almost looks like it.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It almost looks like it. Because all these examples relate to WordPress. Okay. All right. So, in a nutshell, your homework then, as far as this assignment goes, is to do some Googling, find out information about responsive web design. Then, essentially do what I did there. Create two style sheets, one that gets applied in a handheld environment, one that gets applied in a desktop environment. And you can test this even if you don't have a mobile device by running that Opera emulator. So that Opera emulator is available cross-platform. You can download it for free. So go and test it on a few. You don't need to test it on all, but make sure your page looks good in both environments. Now, in the textbook, they give, they follow through, or they carry through a pretty good example of like taking a style sheet that was developed for a desktop environment and like changing it to a more mobile-friendly one. So that would be a good example to follow through as well, in addition to mine. Questions?
That mobile emulator, you said that that's something we can download from our homework folder, or?
Yeah, let me show you where it is in Angel, because I just posted it the other day.
Are you going to put that, what you just did, as an example on Angel?
No. And why am I not going to do that?
So you can just plug in your own information.
No.
Oh.
Don't give anyone any ideas.
Okay.
I'm not going to do that because I already did that.
Oh, okay.
I have posted the example we will discuss tonight in the lecture folder. So, as far as the emulator, oh, you know what? Let me check, make sure that's enabled, because maybe I did not enable it for you folks. It is, no, it's viewable by you.
Yeah, I saw it in there. I checked it.
Yeah, it's so, every now and then I'll put something on and either through sloppiness or if I copied it from somewhere else, it's not enabled for students. It's very unusable, the fact that this icon, you might not even see that there's an icon, is faded if it's disabled. Well, how can you tell that that's faded? That's already faded. They should like make it obvious for us visually, you know, people without the visual acuity of other folks. But yeah, there's the Opera Mobile emulator. If you just go to the Content tab, and the example from the lecture is in the Lectures folder. So when I post a video, I'll post the video in the same place, and you can see the video in that. One of the reasons I post the examples again is because it's not always obvious to be able to see the screen, you know, in the videos and follow along. But if you have the actual files, then you can look at the files as well. I'll try to do this for as many as I can, but again, sometimes I think it's beneficial to actually create the example in front of you to see the thought process develop and all that. So, depending on the situation and depending on, frankly, how much time I have on a given day or whatever, we'll do it. Some days we'll do it one way, some days we'll do it the other.
Okay, so we're just kind of downloading that the way we would Firefox or whatnot.
Yeah, yeah. You just Opera Mobile Emulator. Click on it. And there you go. Alrighty. Other questions? Comments?
I was, when you had mentioned responsive design, I kind of tried to look for examples online to get I guess, a more tangible feel for that. And one thing that I guess I'm seeing a lot, and perhaps this is maybe down the road or under a different term, but sometimes I see pages that are fluid in the sense that everything scales proportionally. 3 columns stays 3 columns, and it just becomes smaller, smaller. But sometimes I'm seeing cases where something starts out big, 4 columns, a giant picture, but as you squeeze the screen, so to speak, some things, even certain pictures, certain columns just disappear. 4 columns becomes just 1, and it's not the matter of everything got reorganized, it's that some things literally just got kicked out. Is that a terminology for mobile devices where, yeah, if I got a great big screen, I see the whole wondrous environment, but if something's smaller or mobile, there's a hierarchy for just showing certain chunks of information?
That could be done any number of different ways, what you described. If you have an example of it, that would be a great one to email in. if you're talking about the content rearranging itself, then it's done with floating, just floating the things, and as they don't fit horizontally, they'll float down beneath it. What you can do, and this even predates mobile, is you can, via JavaScript, when the page is resized, you can invoke code to make changes to the page. All right? So there is, let's see. There's an onResize event in JavaScript. So, who's up to having fun today? Who wants to have some fun?
Hey, I'm game. If someone's willing to show me, I'll look
Okay.
at my shoulder all day.
All right, let's see if I can write some code to make something disappear when the screen gets too small. All right? So, let's go in, let's take this. Let's make a copy of it.
And he'll do this on Angel too, so it's always fun.
No, this one I'm not going to.
No, you sure?
I don't know.
You might like it.
I might. Depends how it works out. Yeah, exactly. If it works out good, yeah, I will. If not, then I will disavow any knowledge. Okay, so I'm gonna go and change this. I'm gonna get rid of all the style sheet. And I'm gonna make two divs. I'm going to make an important div and a less important div. Alright. And I'm going to make every div have a width of 40%, float to the left. Alright. Save. Now let's view this guy. Alright. I am important, I am less important. And as I resize it, it floats. Alright. Let's say if I reach a certain size, I want to just make the less important one disappear. Alright. Again, there might be other ways to do this. This is the way that popped into my mind. On resize. Did I spell that right? Yes. Equals. And I'm going to code this the way I would code it if I was coding it for real. Largely because I actually am coding it for real. I realize it was a stupid thing to say. I'm not pretending to code it. You know, I actually am coding it. All right? And I don't necessarily know exactly how to do this. I have a pretty good idea, but I don't necessarily know all the syntax. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this a bit at a time. Because I know the event. Remember, what's the recipe for JavaScript? The recipe for JavaScript is you have a user event that does something. All right. What is the user event that we want to trigger something happening? I resize the screen. All right? So that gets triggered. I'm going to make sure the wiring between the user event and my JavaScript code works by simply declaring a function here called reDisplay.
That's,
Yeah, I knew things were going too good. Function reDisplay. And I'm just going to put an alert up. It will be very obnoxious. That will say resized. All right. Microsoft, of course, won't protect me from any real viruses, but it will protect me from testing the code that I've written. All right. So, I resized it. And again, the alert's obviously a clunky thing because every time I even move it a pixel, it's firing off. All right. But I do know now that my user event is wired to my JavaScript correctly. Now all I have to do is figure out how do I know the width of the screen. Do I know this? No, not really, but I know someone that does know it. JavaScript window width, and it's probably something like window width. And of course the answer isn't simple. I'm going to copy and paste this code, and I'll give credit where credit is due. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm writing a JavaScript that in a cross-browser way is smart enough to set these two variables to the appropriate width and height of the window. Now all I have to do down here is test that width property, and if when W is less than, let's say, 400, then I'm going to point to that less important div, and I'm going to make it invisible. Otherwise, I'm going to point to that div and make it visible. And I'm going to do that by using JavaScript to set the visibility property. And then we'll test this and see if it works. Oop, disappeared. Reappeared. So, how does this tie into my topic for today? All right. This ties in because I suppose, again, you know, in my mind anyhow, and I might be wrong, you know, there's nothing that's like officially responsive web design, right? That responsive web design means this, this, and this. And something else is some other kind of web design. Responsive web design means that the page is responsive to its environment. And the first pass that we took for this, in my example, we took using probably the most straightforward way of getting responsive web design, and that is through the use of different style sheets and through the use of CSS media queries. And let the CSS media queries decide what gets what style sheet. All right? But that's not the only way to be responsive, right? Another way to be responsive is via JavaScript. Through JavaScript, there are things that you can do that, depending on certain circumstances, you can change any aspect of the page. That's the whole idea of JavaScript. Now, I'm not really sure how familiar all you folks are with JavaScript. I know in my web classes I introduce it, but I don't really go into it in great detail. All right, but the idea of JavaScript is we can actually write code that fires off when certain events happen. And that code can do virtually anything with the page that it wants to. It can make things disappear, make things appear, change colors, change size. Any property that you can set via CSS or, in fact, HTML, you can change via JavaScript. How do you do that? Well, you capture the event, you write an event handler, you use the DOM to point to the appropriate element on the screen. In this case, document, get element by ID, using the appropriate ID, and then you can set any attributes of it. You can set the visibility and so on. Depending on how much fun you want to have, all right, we could make the font size of the other one get smaller as the window gets smaller. Let's try this. Let's see if this works.
I've seen that a lot with these sites that example after example.
Yeah, the idea is the reason the reason I went and did that particular one is just to really illustrate that with JavaScript and the DOM, if you can point to the thing on the page, you can manipulate virtually anything about it. You know, we could, you know, when this gets a certain size, we could change the color of the page if we wanted to, and so on. So via JavaScript is another way that you can make your page responsive. You know, the media queries is sort of like, yeah, it might be a little confusing, but if you stare at it for a minute, or if you hear an explanation, like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So that one's kind of a quick win. The JavaScript is a little more involved, but it offers it offers tons of flexibility and ability to do stuff dynamically and so on. Other questions?
Could I see that last line again?
This last line?
Scrolling right.
What I did, just for laughs, is I took the width divided by 400 and made the font size that many M. So I figured at maximum, the screen might be 800 or 1,000 pixels. I don't know how big this one is. So that would make it 2M. When it got to be 400, it would be like 1M. And then smaller than that, it would be smaller than 1M. All right, I will post this just as an example. I mean, to illustrate sort of another technique for doing that. I guess the one other thing that you potentially could do is you could have server-side code that does a similar thing. All right. The limitation of server-side code is it would only run when a request is made to the server, whereas this is running in the browser, so it can respond. This can respond without having to request a new page, new copy of the page from the server.
In terms of what you just did, in terms of as you condense the screen, part of it literally went by.
Right.
Is there a certain terminology or title that you would give such a thing? I mean, how would you?
That specific? No, I would simply call that just another aspect of responsive web design. If there is another term for it, I'm not aware of it.
Oh,
you know, dynamic pages, DHTML is sort of the old term that was used for it, dynamic HTML, where you use JavaScript to manipulate the page, I guess is another term for it.
So where are you running, this isn't the notepad, then are you using your local host, or how are you?
No, I'm just opening up, because remember, this is client-side code, so it runs inside the browser. So as long as I can open the page in a browser, that JavaScript code will run. It's not like server-side code where I have to request the page from the server, and the server has to do its thing and then delivers the page.
So it's like you go to Firefox and load a page?
Yep.
Okay.
Did I mess up and do height by mistake?
You said what?
Did I?
I thought.
No, I did do height.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No wonder it was acting weird. You know, I saw it was working, resizing it, but it just didn't seem right. All right. This should be right. And now if I change the height, it doesn't matter, but there we go. All right, let me make sure I upload this to Angel. I was thinking if I was doing this for real. I could either know all the IDs that were less important that I would want to make disappear and give them certain IDs, or I suppose I could assign a class to them and write a little more involved JavaScript to loop through, look for things of a certain class, and make sure those disappeared. I'm not sure what the more appealing option would be. All right, let me make sure I upload this. Any other questions?